Elden Ring is absolutely awesome and challenging, pretty much just like you'd expect. But if you're new, just know that there's a lot of mistakes you can potentially make. So here's some things you shouldn't do. We got 10 examples, so let's get started off with number 10. Don't get stuck endlessly ramming your head into what seems like a nearly impossible boss fight. Now, Elden Ring is a massive open world game, but there are a lot of people out there making the mistake that it isn't. Instead of going out and exploring the world, they bash their skulls into the closest boss that they're clearly under-leveled to fight, inevitably dying again and again in the process. Maybe it's a matter of pride, gamer pride, I don't know, but some folks just cannot walk away and try again later. But that's what you should do. This isn't like some other Souls games where you're basically stuck if you can't beat a certain boss. In this game, you can easily go do something else, and there are probably a few much easier bosses nearby that you can take out instead and learn and grow stronger. Now, for some players, this is right at the start with the Tree Sentinel, that armored knight wandering around right outside the starting tomb, and for others, it's Margit, but either way, there's no reason to fight these guys if you're getting crushed by them. Seriously, just go do something else. Get a few levels and come back. Learn the ropes of the game a little bit. You don't want to immediately just hate the game. You don't want to die 40 times right at the start. Long story short, if you find yourself dying constantly to a boss, just remember that there's no shame in a tactical retreat. Now, next over at number 9, a lot of people make the mistake not to remove Baldachin's blessing. There's a mysterious character that says she'll grant you a boon if you let her hold you in the round table hold, like just a nice hug. And hearing that sounds like a good thing, right?
What you felt light up inside you was a Baldachin's blessing. Though it is but a fleeting thing, I am afraid. Come back to me, should you require another. I will take you in my arms as often as you need.
But actually, the blessing she gives you is a net negative and lowers your maximum HP. There's no way you'd know that would happen the first time around, so we can't really blame anyone for trying. We certainly did. But one easily fixed mistake a lot of people make is that they don't actually remove the Baldachin's blessing that is given to you from their inventory. That's the thing that's causing the debuff on your health, and you can easily just select it and get rid of it if you want. It's really as simple as that, just removing the blessing and your health will go back to normal. Elden Ring is massive. It's filled with a lot of different use cases and examples, so this can be necessary for something, but for most people, in the beginning of the game, you're gonna need all the HP you can get. We think a lot of people make the mistake of just assuming that this blessing item is just there to show you what the effect is, and you can't actually get rid of it, but you actually can. There's no additional steps or secrets you have to find to do it. Just select it, and it's gone. There you go. It's a really basic one, but it's a mistake a lot of people are making right now, including us. Now, next over at number 8, a mistake you can make is really just getting too hung up on character build stuff at the start. Don't freak out at the start over your character class. Just try to slightly lean towards what you're into or interested in, but also know that you can change it up later because the game gives you at least enough freedom to fill in whatever stats you want, regardless of the class you pick. You can pivot a bit. This game is so open and they give you so many different weapons and spells and pieces of armor that you'll be able to switch up and pivot your playstyle somewhat. It's not ideal, especially if you're more experienced, but you can. Hell, if you're not happy with your build, then you can even do a complete respec of your character. All you have to do is beat the Shard Bearer in Liurnia and you're all good, as long as you got the surprisingly common item that gets spent while respecking. The biggest thing though, the biggest mistake that we see made, don't try to become a jack of all trades here. Don't think you can just evenly distribute points in a little bit of everything. You can't quite do that here. You're gonna need to at least have a few stats at substantial levels to really get somewhere, especially if you're a first timer. Next over at number 7, so many players are making the mistake of heading east right when they start the game, only to end up in the hellish wasteland of Caelid when they're ridiculously underleveled to deal with the place. Now, maybe it's the guidance of grace tricking them over there, maybe it's just their own curiosity, but this is a place you do not want to go when you're just starting out. It's a nasty place to be in for most of the game. The enemies here can give you a lot of trouble, even if you're awesome. The freak crows don't care. They'll just kill you as easily either way, no matter what level of player you are. So don't just make the mistake of wandering into this place, and really don't make the mistake of thinking that this is the way the game expects you to go. Just try going north or south instead. This is where you're going to spend a ton of hours in the early game. There's a lot of things in those directions that are designed to be fought roughly, generally at your level, especially in the southern area, you know, the Weeping Peninsula. It's a perfect place to start out for new players. So while it can be really tempting to check out this weird place to the east, it's really a mistake to head there too early on your adventure. Now, next over at number 6, one mistake we've seen a lot of players make is that they just rush through areas, either on horseback or just by running past enemies to get to the Sites of Grace checkpoints. Now, it's a tempting mistake to make because many enemies are pretty easy to avoid, and some folks either get afraid of losing progress or just want to move through the game quickly, but that's only something you should do sometimes. Sometimes it can really be a mistake. Outside of the obvious problems that can happen with this, like being underleveled when fighting a boss, another big thing you might miss out if you rush through an area is all of the important items you can find along the way that's going to make your life that much better. You start the game with only one talisman slot, but the further you get, the more you unlock, and some of these things can be incredibly powerful and make certain fights much easier. Then there's new armor, weapons, even spirit ashes that you can find that make things much easier for yourself in the long run. Fully exploring a location, even if it's scary, will help you out a lot more than just rushing through it. Of course, you know, we're not saying you should stop and fight every single little wandering monster out in the world. No way, that would be a waste of your time. But at least if you do rush through an area, maybe just think about going back through it now that you're not so pressured to find a checkpoint. Now, next over at number 5, here's an easy mistake to make. Certain enemies have different resistances depending on what they are, and if you use the wrong weapon, it can be a frustrating experience to say the least. Try to use a slashing weapon against a rock monster, you'll get nowhere. So try to mix things up and use a striking weapon like a club next time to damage these heavily armored dudes. It's less important when you're dealing with regular enemies, but for certain bosses like the Falling Star Beast, switching up your weapons can make a huge difference. Even if it's something you're not very good with, it's sometimes just worth a shot to see if you'll have more luck with a different weapon, or even if you just change out your weapon's Ashes of War to try to do elemental damage or something. But if it feels like you're not doing any damage to certain enemies, then it's worth trying something new. Maybe it'll make things easier. Next over at number 4, a big mistake, a lot of players are missing out on using weapons two-handed. Now, if you're a Souls veteran, then this kind of tip is a no-brainer, but it's something that a lot of players either forget about or just don't even realize you could do. It doesn't help that actually switching to two-handed weapons has changed in Elden Ring, so some old-school players may be confused about what you're supposed to do. On a controller, you have to hit triangle or Y, then press R1 to switch to using the weapon in your right hand two-handed, or L1 to use the weapon in your left hand two-handed. This definitely took a little bit of getting used to, but it eventually starts to become second nature after a few hours or so. What's important about two-handing a weapon is that it increases the damage you do with it, and it also critically improves the amount of poise damage you do. Now, poise is a stat that governs if an enemy will flinch when hit, and eventually when they'll break, which allows you to hit them with a critical strike. Now, breaking an enemy's poise is one of the best ways to take them down. Hell, it even works on a lot of bosses, which can make them much easier. The downside, of course, is that you'll be short a shield to defend yourself or something else, so you'll take damage if you try and block with your sword, but that's why you have to get used to switching to two-handed and then back to one-handed on the fly, so you can do damage when you want while still having access to your shield when you really need it, or any other item. Just get used to swapping two hands in and out, especially if you're the type of build that caters to it. It'll take a little practice, but you'd be surprised just how much stronger it can make your attacks. Now, next over at number 3, big mistake, definitely make sure to not ignore the NPC quests. Like, if someone says something to you that even vaguely sounds like a task or a request, try to remember it. Yeah, there's no quest log, so keeping track of people's requests can be a little confusing, but in contrast to other games where there's little reason to follow these characters, there's actually a few very good reasons to do it in this game. For one, certain areas can only be reached by participating in certain characters' quests. I don't think you'll necessarily have to start them from the beginning for it to work, but you'll definitely have to talk to certain characters and do something for them to reveal certain sections of the map, or just cool little things to discover. And on top of that, some of the rewards you get for doing these things are legitimately good. It can get you unique armor or some really interesting weapons or handy dandy items. So taking the time to get to the end of some of these things is really worth it. Here's another quick little tip for finishing certain quests. After going through all of a character's dialogue, always make sure to leave and come back to just see if they have anything else to say and click it again. You know, certain NPCs need to be talked to multiple times this way before their quest will actually advance. Yeah, it's a little awkward, but it can be seriously worth it depending on the character. And if you're really struggling with what to do for some character or another, just look up a guide online. We won't judge you here. We mentioned this a little bit in our previous tips style video, so check that out if you haven't yet. Now down to number 2, another mistake we're seeing a lot of people make is that they're not changing out Ashes of War to change the damage scaling on a weapon. Now, this kind of thing can make a huge difference on your damage output depending on what scaling option you choose, so it's important to always attach an ash to any weapon you're serious about using and setting the scaling to whatever you got the most points in. Now if you don't know, weapon scaling is the amount of damage a weapon can do depending on a stat. So a weapon with a B in strength scaling means that it'll do a lot more damage if you got a lot of points in strength. If it's dexterity scaling, then that's better. You get the idea. If a weapon has a D in strength scaling, that means the weapon isn't going to get as much of a benefit from your strength stat. Certain weapons don't scale at all, while others pretty much are entirely dependent on scaling to do most of the damage. It's kind of a confusing system, but they took pretty much all of the risk out of it in Elden Ring compared to previous Souls games, so you can just try out different scaling methods whenever you want and see which ones give you the biggest benefit. Basically, if you got a lot of points in strength, it makes sense to use a weapon with high strength scaling. While if you got a lot of points in dexterity, then you should use weapons with high dex scaling instead. It's not a hard and fast rule because certain weapons will probably just be better, but in general, if a weapon has a high rating scaling like an A or a B, then it'll be a lot stronger if you put your points into the affected stat. Now down to number 1, Spirit Ashes are an amazing tool that can turn certain crazy difficult encounters into things that are totally beatable. But there are a lot of people who don't quite understand what the deal is with these things, or maybe they just don't want to use them. For one thing, be sure to try to get the Spirit Summoner Bell at the starting church that has the merchant. If you don't ever go back to this place, you can easily miss out on it as it's given to you by the witch, who only shows up after you visited this place once already. Now once you've got this key item, all you have to do is equip a Spirit Ash in your quick select inventory and use it when this little symbol appears in the left side corner of the UI. Don't sleep on these things. They're a major game mechanic that seems like the game is somewhat designed around. There are certain bosses where it feels like the game expects you to use spirit summons. It's giving you the tools, so use them. Some of the stuff in this game can be overwhelmingly difficult, so if you're having a hard time, use them. Sure, there are some people online that may judge you and say you gotta beat it the old-fashioned way with no help, but who cares? They put it in the game, they want you to use it, just make your own fun, man. If you're having a hard time, there's no shame in calling in some backup. There's no real penalty at all, so don't feel like you gotta be the cool guy who beats a boss on your own. You don't have to do it, just summon some help. There are plenty of bosses in the game that already don't play fair, so beat them at their own game a little bit. But those are some mistakes that we see people make in Elden Ring. Consider them kind of tips for beginners, really. We want to hear from you guys in the comments what you think. If this is your first game, or if you've played every single Souls game, if you got any tips, definitely leave them for people down in the comments, because people are certainly going to need them. If you enjoyed this video, though, and maybe it helped you out, clicking the like button's all you got to do. It really helps us out, and we appreciate it. But as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.